Introducing Copilot in Azure SQL Database. Need I say more? Watch the episode now. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed. Today we have a super exciting episode around AI, and for that I'm bringing on Joe Sack. Many of you might know Joe from the community, but for those who don't know, Joe can tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Anna. It's good to see you. It's been a few years since the Query Store hints. My name is Joe Sack. I am a product manager on the Azure SQL Database team. Most recently, I've been working with data science team members and also engineers on SQL Copilot, and specifically, we're talking about Copilot in Azure SQL Database.
Cool, awesome. And we're excited to have you on. Query Hints was really exciting, but Copilot is exciting too. This is something brand new. Like, I'm not sure when we're going to be able to release this episode, but hopefully it's right around the release. So folks maybe just heard about Copilot and Azure SQL Database. What is it?
Yeah, so it's really two experiences that we're starting with. So let's start with that framing. And we always have lots of different names, but just think about this is a Copilot in Azure SQL Database, and we're surfacing it in two areas in the portal. And you'll see on the slide, first area that we're releasing this in is built into Azure Copilot. Last November, you might have seen the announcement, Azure Copilot was released. In the portal, you have this sidecar experience where you can ask questions about your Azure estate all across Azure. And what we've done is we built in Azure SQL skills, and think of them as like DBA skills. And I'll show you a few examples of it. So that's the first experience. And then the second experience is natural language to SQL. And we've built this into the portal query editor. And so I'll be showing you a demo of being able to ask natural language questions and then the Copilot generating T-SQL. So I can dive in. Let's go ahead and look at the first experience. The first thing we're going to show is launching Azure Copilot integration. So you see I'm in the Azure Database blade. I click the Copilot button, and I'm just going to say my database is slow. So let's just keep it nice and simple. I have a slow database. Copilot looks behind the scenes, says, yes, there were actually 41 minutes where CPU was higher than 80%. And it actually sees that there's a specific query that seems to be driving that CPU. So you see the query here. And then we look at Query Store in the background. So before it was DMVs, now it's Query Store. And we see for the last 2 hours, this thing has been executed almost 25,000 times. And based on these observations, Copilot recommends we try to troubleshoot the high CPU query. Now, following this, you'll see a couple of different suggestions. So looking at what's driving CPU, maybe missing indexes, any changes into workload. But I can also just ask. So I could say, hey, what can I do to improve that query? And notice I used that query. I didn't have to restate what the query was. So keep the context. And Copilot says, yes, for that hash, we see an index would be helpful on list price for the properties table. And here's the index that we recommend. And then the estimated percentage we think that we could help with, along with some helpful links. Like if you're a new DBA, some links to learn about missing indexes and about index tuning in general. We also looked at some anti-patterns. For example, does that query have any association with a large in list, for example? And we didn't find any. And then you can also click here at the end of any chat exchange and look at the queries we might have run in the background, Copilot ran to answer this question. So I just click the link. We see a missing index CTE definition. I can run it in the query editor. I can copy it out. I can modify it. But we just show those queries along the way at any moment in time in your interaction and discussion.
Wow. That is super cool. Joe, I gotta ask.
It is like a Bob in the box, by the way.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, man, I feel like I'm just working with an expert, but right in the Azure portal. Seems super cool. It seems like, especially for folks who are experts, but even folks who aren't experts, like a great way to quickly debug and figure out what is the issue happening in my Azure SQL database right now. Of course, like one question I have to ask before we get into these skills is like, what's happening with my data when I'm asking Copilot these things? Like, I feel like maybe as a user, I might be a little bit concerned, like, is my company data going to Azure Copilot and being stored and training, or what's happening?
Yeah, super important question. So first of all, we do not train Azure OpenAI models with your data, with your prompts, with the responses. So your data is your data. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that Copilot operates under your permissions. So if you don't have permissions to see things, nor will Copilot.
Oh,
Now, in terms of the actual feedback, we look at interactions. We'll store, did you give it a thumbs up, thumbs down? If you choose to share your prompts, we may use that to improve the product, but you can also choose not to do that. And so we'll just look at what your overall response was to the various Copilot questions. This is
awesome.
also why it's so important in the early days when we do this early gated preview, because we want to have pretty tight interactions with customers as we collect this feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. And I also really appreciate the transparency at the end of the result that kind of says, like, hey, if you want to know what query we were using, here's what we were using. So
Definitely. Yeah.
super cool.
So with that said, just a little bit more on Azure Copilot integration. You'll see on the slide, there's a lot of different skills. This isn't the full list. I think I counted on the spreadsheet we're using to check the various skills. There's more than 40 skills that we're going to gated preview with. And some of these are like active user connections. For example, you might think, well, I have a query that I could use to run that, but you'll find with a lot of the responses from the Copilot, it enriches it. So it may give more context. And sometimes it even asks questions that you should maybe be asking, but you didn't, and it adds it. And so it's pretty magical in a lot of different ways. So, okay, natural language to SQL. This is the second experience I was telling you about in the Portal Query Editor. And for those who don't use the Portal Query Editor, it's really just for light browsing, light querying. A lot of people still use SSMS and ADS, but we do get a lot of traffic to the Portal Query Editor as well. We've added a place to ask a natural language question. And then what we'll do is translate it to T-SQL, and we'll use the context, again, based on your own permissions of table name, view name, column names, primary key, and foreign key relationships. Now, how does it actually operate behind the scenes? Similar to Copilot, we're using large language models behind the scenes. So another demo here, you're seeing the query editor. You're going to see a new Launch Inline Copilot button. And you're going to see a new box where you can put in your prompt. And so I'm asking a question, show me all agents who have listed more than 2 properties for sale. And then we have this option to filter down the actual tables or views for consideration for answering your question. I'll leave them all checked, but you could do that if there's any ambiguity or overlap. And then you have this generate query button. And this will generate 3 different outputs. This will take about 3 seconds. The first output is the prompt in comments to just remind you what you originally asked. The second is an explanation of the query that was constructed by the Copilot. So walking through that query. And then the third is the query itself, which at this point you can accept, you can run it as we're doing right now, or you could edit it or change the prompt. Another example for you is a little bit more complicated. It's a pivot summary table that displays the number of properties sold in each year from 2020 to 2023. I could not do this by hand. I've been working with SQL since 1997. Can't do it by hand. This generates it in a few seconds. Again, we'll show the prompt. We'll show the explanation. Within the select, you'll see this select year showing a count of properties sold by year. And then you'll see the pivot section, which determines what are the different column names, 2020 through 2023. At this point, I can modify it or decide to run it. And sure enough, we have a count of properties by year. So that's the natural language to SQL experience.
Awesome. Wow, that is so cool. You know, it reminds me of some other kind of autocomplete natural language type of experience I've had. However, like this actually has the context. Like it seems like it knows the names of the columns and it knows the values. So it makes it a lot better, right?
That's right. Yep. So it'll use the metadata. It won't use the actual data values, but it'll use the column names, table names, view names, and then also primary key and foreign key. And that's just the start. We think that there may be more that we'll want to add for context to help with more complicated schemas, but we wanted to get this out here soon so people could start testing.
Cool. Awesome. I see some FAQs here. Actually, these were all
Yes.
of the things on my mind. So
Great. I'll go through them. Yeah. So you alluded to this a little bit earlier, just whether we're training models with this, which the answer is no. But also we talked a little bit about the permissions already. So how does the data get used? And we ground the responses in your environment, but it's only those resources that you have permissions to in the context and actions you would be able to perform. How much will it cost? During preview, there'll be no cost. And then for this initial offering, it's across the Azure SQL Database. So that means general purpose, business critical, hyperscale, vCore, DTU, serverless, elastic pools. And then the next question, which is very popular, which is, okay, what about everything else? And of course, this will lend itself to so many different areas of SQL. So just watch this space. We know Copilots will be useful across the full portfolio. So we're just starting here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're really excited about this. Yeah, absolutely. So, as it comes to tips and tricks, maybe the right tip and trick is how to sign up since this is gated.
Yes, yes. So this is very similar to when we had the SQL Server 2022 EAP. We're starting slow. We're going to do a limited number of seats, and then we'll onboard on a rolling basis. You see the short link here, SQL Copilot dash sign up. We're going to be just focusing, making sure we have customers across a diversity of different workloads and use cases to make sure we get that feedback while there's that ability to, a lot of these folks I'm going to be calling, connecting with, and just trying to understand how we can focus on the three main attributes, which are the quality of the answer, the depth, because getting that depth just right is a fine art, and then speed, of course. You might be willing to wait 3 minutes for high CPU because it might have taken you a few hours, but maybe you're not willing to wait 10 minutes. So we're just trying to calibrate the different speeds across each of the skills.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show. I learned a lot. I'm really excited about the new Copilot capabilities. I'm sure viewers are too. So viewers will put a link in the description for you to learn more as well as any other resources you might need. If you like this episode and you like these capabilities, go ahead and sign up for the private preview. Make sure you share all the info we need to make sure you have a good scenario that fits with the things we're trying to test. Leave us a comment and let us know what you think about this in general. And we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.